An emerging trend is the rise of a potential EU cloud that has greater market share in the EU and is originating from the EU, as well as more of an emphasis on open source clouds. So, I'm going to talk about some of the options that are available in Europe and also what are some of the open providers. So, to start with, if we take a look at the public cloud vendors in the EU and we look at who's in the lead, we see that very similar to the US, Amazon Web Services is in the lead. Roughly, let's say a third of the market share is by the Amazon cloud, and they have EU regions like Frankfurt, Ireland, Paris, etc. And they also have a lot of the same services available that are available in the US. So this is a strong option for people that want to do cloud computing and want to use the Premier Cloud, and they also have to apply by the EU specific data residency guarantees. So this is an emerging thing that we're probably going to see in the next 5 years is as the US and Europe bifurcate and get farther away from each other, there could be a lot of emphasis from European countries on their own data sovereignty and also their own national sovereignty and avoiding big tech companies who have shown an interest in taking over some of the government functions of EU countries. And there's a book recently called The Tech Coup that talks about how big tech wants to be an alternate form of government. And it's coming for not just the US, and we've seen this with the election, but also for European countries as well. So there's, I think, an independence factor as well that we're seeing. So let's take a look at the next big player, which would be Microsoft Azure. Roughly about a quarter market share, very strong historical inroads into Europe, and we have GCP, which is maybe 10%. Now let's get to the largest EU headquartered provider, which is OVHcloud, and this is about 5% market share, and this is uniquely positioned to be a fully European operation. So now let's get into that was the top by market share, but now let's look at some of the actual providers and drilled into like where they're located, etc. So in Europe, we have Germany and France are the two largest, most industrialized countries. And if we look at OVHcloud here in France, the market position is it's the largest EU headquartered provider. So it has about 5% EU market share, 33 data centers across 4 continents, so 400,000 plus servers. Pretty big amount of space there. And then in terms of differentiation, it has the full sovereignty play. And so that means that if European countries wanted to completely separate from any role with the US, this is one of the options for the European Union. They also have things like bare metal offerings. We also see there is T-Systems or Deutsche Telekom Germany also potentially has some interest there. We have Orange Business Services France. They have managed services, SAP Germany. And then we also have Scaleway France as well. So Scaleway France is an interesting one as kind of an emerging player here because I've seen a lot of feedback with some of the newer companies in like Mistral, and they have infrastructure footprints. So they have data centers in France, Poland, Netherlands, and also it seems like there's some pretty good growth here. So if we look at what this comes down to, potentially 3 of the ones that seem pretty interesting to me would be OVHcloud France. It has custom servers designed and manufactured in-house. They have Linux-based proprietary virtualization layer, also self-built European fiber backbone, and also in-house distributed storage system. We also have Scaleway France. As I mentioned, it seems like there's a lot of interesting things happening in terms of integration with AI companies in France, custom hypervisor, also a lot of ARM options. And we also have Hetzner Germany, which is a bare metal focused company, 100% European data center also has custom DDoS protection systems designed in Germany, in-house block storage, also isolation from US networks. Now, if we look down at some of the open source cloud options, this might be the other place to look. So as we see, as there's kind of this tension rising between the US and Europe, there could be a lot of European countries that are and maybe even other parts of the world that want to distance themselves from the US and US technology companies. Not only do companies potentially want to look at the cloud provider, but also they want to look at open source cloud offerings. So the top one to start to build more of an open cloud would be OpenStack. And this is the most mature enterprise ready open source cloud platform. They have a lot of infrastructure as a service functionality. So infrastructure as a service, the best way to describe this would be it's like the low level building blocks. So we have object storage, compute, networking, and the key components are Nova, which is a compute layer, and also Swift, which is object storage, and then Neutron for networking. And there's actually a pretty large adoption of OpenStack. So this is by far the biggest leader in terms of open source cloud offerings. Next up here, the one that's not necessarily a complete cloud platform, but close, is Kubernetes. Some people describe it as a cloud in a box. And so this is the standard for, planet scale container orchestration. It's not a complete cloud platform alone, but it does have the majority of the components for many cloud platforms. And Kubernetes does work with Google GKE, AWS EKS, Azure AKS. So what it means is that if a company has designed around Kubernetes or even just containers, and the majority of their workloads work on containers, you could make a case for it not being that terrible to port your workloads slowly to another cloud, especially because Kubernetes is a standard that you can move that compute essentially to any cloud in the world, including European clouds. So I could see how Kubernetes in the next 5 years could get a lot more traction. Some of the things it can do include exceptional scalability, self-healing capabilities, declarative configuration, and also a lot of tools like Helm, operators, etc. Now, in terms of the second tier options here, there also are some interesting emerging options. There's Apache Cloud Stack, which is an infrastructure as a service platform, a little more straightforward potentially than some of the other ones, but less flexibility, very mature as well. And we also have Open Nebula, which is a lighter weight version, lower resource requirements than OpenStack, also integrates well with traditional tools like VMware and KVM environments. And then in terms of emerging platforms, we have Rancher, which is a lightweight Kubernetes distribution optimized for edge and also simplified deployment with binary installation. So that's definitely appealing to me. Like binary installation is beautiful because you just push a binary somewhere. And in the case of containers, for example, I recently did a podcast where I talked about building 16 kilobyte containers. I love binary deployment to containers. You also have the ability to grow ecosystems for edge computing. And then finally, we have the OpenShift Kubernetes distribution. This would be an upstream project for Red Hat, OpenShift, and developer focus as well. So really to wrap things up here, what we're seeing is really a once-in-a-lifetime separation from the United States and Europe. In fact, recently there was a vote on Russian and Ukraine aggression by the UN, and the America voted with countries that typically you would not want to be associated with, North Korea, Russia, etc., on basically not condemning the aggression from Russia and Ukraine. So you can see that there's a tension rising where the European Union seems to want to become more of an independent entity and is a regional player. And from a business perspective, what's very fascinating is that there could be a huge growth in the European cloud and also open source cloud. So there's a pretty amazing opportunity, in fact, from a technology perspective, to have independence from US technology and US cloud providers. So I see that as one opportunity in 2025 from a business perspective. Another component that I see that's kind of a stealth component here is a separation from the United States from a human rights perspective. One of the real problems with the propaganda coming from United States VC industry, big tech industry, is that Europe is a region that has poor innovation. Clearly, that's not the case. If you look at Mercedes and Audi, and you look at Mistral that does AI, there's lots of examples of amazing products that come from Europe. What really is happening is when you talk about GDP as the only way to measure progress, GDP really is a bad metric. It's like a bad data science metric because it disguises what's really happening underneath the hood. You could call this like a vanity metric or even a false metric, like a mirage. Because in the case of, let's say, Starbucks recently, the CEO gets paid roughly $100 million a year. What's the first thing they do? Fire 8,000 people. Is that really innovation, or is that actually a repression of human rights? Likewise, when you hear about European Union is regulating data privacy and regulating addiction from smartphones, etc., is that actually innovation to have a lack of data privacy and to have addiction with smartphones, or is that actually common sense to stop that? So I see not only the sovereign cloud angle and the sovereign data angle becoming a really big deal, along with sovereign defense, where we see more of an emphasis on European military defense. But I also see an angle here in terms of human rights. Is the European Union going to be the leader in human rights? If we look at the UN definition of human rights, where people have the ability to have privacy, own their own property, like in the case of the United States, where intellectual property has been essentially torrented, pirated by companies like Meta to train AI models. Could the human rights perspective of the European Union be a big role as well? So there's a lot of balls in the air that I do think create huge opportunity for the European Union. They could be the place that is the leader in democracy, a leader in human rights, and also a leader in thoughtful innovation that respects human rights. So pretty interesting scenario here for European companies, people that are focused in France and Germany, Spain. There's a lot of opportunity, I think, for that region, and a lot of opportunity for open source as well.